the Elizabethan curriculum. A classical education for the modern man. Lecture 9. Virgil, the man, and his moment. There is a story told about the Aeneid that is almost certainly true, which already distinguishes it from most stories told about ancient poets. When Virgil died in 19 before the Christian era, the poem was not finished. He knew it was not finished. He had spent 11 years on it, had read portions of it aloud to Augustus and to Augustus's family, had reduced the emperor's sister Octavia to tears with the passage about her dead son, Marcellus, and he was still not satisfied. On his deathbed he asked that the manuscript be burned. His literary executors, acting on the instructions of Augustus himself, refused. The Aeneid survived against the explicit wishes of its author. This is not a trivial detail. It tells you something essential about the poem and about the world in which it was written. The Aeneid belonged to Augustus before it belonged to Virgil, in a sense that Virgil understood completely, and that he could do nothing about. He had accepted the commission, taken the patronage, spent 11 years on the work, and at the end he wanted it gone. Augustus wanted it to exist. Augustus won. This is, when you think about it, a rather compressed version of what the poem is actually about. Publius Vergilius Maro was born in 70 before the Christian era, near Mantua in the north of Italy, in a farming family of modest means and sufficient education to recognize that their son had abilities worth cultivating. He studied in Cremona, in Milan, and eventually in Rome, where he encountered the philosophical school of Epicurus through a teacher named Ciro, and found in Epicurean withdrawal from public life a temperamental home that suited him rather well. Virgil was not a public man. He was quiet, private, apparently somewhat physically fragile, not given to the forum or the law court or the dinner party circuit that constituted Roman literary social life. He was, in the most straightforward sense, a poet, a man who needed solitude and time and the long, slow process of working language until he did what he wanted, which was always more than language ordinarily does. His early career produced the Eclogues and the Georgics, and we will return to both of them because they matter for understanding the Aeneid. But the biographical fact that shapes everything is this. Virgil came to maturity during the civil wars. He was a young man when Caesar crossed the Rubicon. He was in his 20s during the years of assassination and counter-assassination and the chaos of the triumvirate. His family's farm near Mantua was confiscated during the land distributions that followed the Battle of Philippi in 42, when Octavian, not yet Augustus, needed land to settle his veterans and took it from whoever had it. Virgil may or may not have recovered the farm through the intervention of powerful friends. The ancient sources disagree. What is certain is that he had experienced, personally and directly, what civil war does to ordinary life. The farm, the land, the patient cultivation of something over generations simply taken. This is not background color for the Georgics. It is the wound the Georgics is written from. By the time Virgil began the Aeneid in earnest, probably around 29 before the Christian era, Octavian had become Augustus. The civil wars were over, and Rome was in the strange, suspended state of a patient who has survived a nearly fatal illness and does not yet know whether the recovery is genuine or merely a remission. Augustus needed the recovery to be genuine, needed it to be seen as genuine, needed a story that explained why everything that had happened, the blood and the chaos and the years of destruction, had been not merely survived but in some larger sense necessary. He needed a mythology, and he knew, because he was not a stupid man, that Virgil was the person to provide it. The commission, if we can call it that, was for a national epic on the model of Homer. Rome had no Homer. Greece had the Iliad and the Odyssey, poems that had defined Greek identity for centuries, that gave the Greeks their gods and their heroes, and their sense of what excellence looked like and what it cost. Rome had nothing equivalent. Rome had Aeneas, an earlier epic poet whom Virgil admired and quietly superseded, and it had Lucretius, whose De Rerum Natura was a philosophical epic of extraordinary power, but was not quite what Augustus had in mind, since its argument was essentially that the gods do not exist and death is nothing to fear, and the pursuit of political glory is a form of madness. Useful philosophy, awkward propaganda. Virgil was given the task of supplying what Rome lacked, an origin story, a poem that traced the founding of Rome back to Troy, connecting Roman destiny to the oldest and most prestigious mythology available, and that placed Augustus himself at the culmination of a divine plan stretching back to the fall of a city 3,000 years before he was born. It was, as commissions go, ambitious. What Virgil produced was the commission fulfilled, and, simultaneously, something that exceeds and complicates it in ways that have occupied readers ever since. The Aeneid is the poem Augustus asked for. It is also running underneath that poem, like a dark river under a bright surface, a sustained and unresolved meditation on what the fulfillment of destiny actually costs. Not the cost in treasure or in military effort, the cost in human suffering, in lives interrupted and ended, in love destroyed, in the accumulated weight of everything that had to be sacrificed on the altar of Rome's ordained greatness. Augustus got his national epic. What he perhaps did not fully reckon with was that he was commissioning it from a man who had watched his family's farm confiscated for veteran settlement, who had lived through 20 years of civil war, who had the temperament of a philosopher rather than a propagandist, and whose deepest artistic instincts were not toward celebration but toward elegy. The Aeneid celebrates Rome's founding. It also mourns with extraordinary tenderness and precision almost everyone who had to die for it to happen. The Elizabethan reader came to the Aeneid already knowing its reputation. It was not merely the greatest Latin poem, it was in the educational culture of the Renaissance, and after the poem that a serious education culminated in. Dante chose Virgil as his guide through hell and purgatory, not randomly, but because Virgil represented the summit of what human reason and human art could achieve without the specific gift of Christian revelation. This was the highest compliment the medieval and Renaissance mind could pay a pagan author. You reached as far as unaided human intelligence could go. The Elizabethan schoolboy who had worked through Terence and Cicero and was now opening the Aeneid, understood that he was arriving somewhere, that the years of Latin grammar and rhetorical exercises had been preparation for this. Arma virumque cano, I sing of arms and a man. The first 4 words of the poem and one of the most analyzed opening lines in literary history. Notice what Virgil does. He sings of arms first, the military action, the war, the epic subject matter that the tradition demands, and then immediately, in the same breath, the man, the individual human being who must carry the arms and be shaped and broken and reforged by carrying them. The tension between the public obligation and the private person is there in the first 4 words. It never resolves. The whole poem is contained in that tension. The man is Aeneas, and Aeneas is one of the most misunderstood figures in Western literature, precisely because he is so frequently judged by the wrong standard. He is not Achilles. He is not the hero of individual excellence, the man whose greatness expresses itself in the assertion of his own will against the world. He is something the epic tradition had not quite seen before, and has not entirely known what to do with, since he is the hero of duty. The man whose greatness consists precisely in the subordination of his own desires, his own grief, his own love, to an obligation he did not choose and cannot escape. The Latin word for it is pietas, which we translate as piety, but which means something much larger. Duty to the gods, to the state, to the family, to the dead, to the future that depends on you whether you want it to depend on you or not. Aeneas is Pierce. Aeneas, from almost his first appearance in the poem, the adjective is not a compliment in the modern sense. It is a description of a burden. In our next lecture, we go into the poem itself, the fall of Troy, which is where the Aeneid begins, and which Virgil renders with a vividness and a grief that has never been surpassed, the wanderings that follow, and then Carthage, and Dido, and the most heartbreaking episode in Latin poetry. A man who loves a woman, genuinely loves her, and leaves her anyway, because the gods have told him he must. And the question that Virgil asks, and does not answer, is whether a destiny that requires this of a man is something to be celebrated or mourned, or most uncomfortably, both. End of Lecture 9.